Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Amy Sam. I am the Health Education Project Specialist at the Maxwell and Eleanor Blum Patient Family Learning Center at Mass General Hospital. Before we get started, just want to go over a few items with you all. Please note that today's session is being recorded for educational purposes. If you're interested in viewing the recording, you may visit the Blum Center website at massgeneral.org/Blum-Center. Please note that you are in listen-only mode. Everyone has been muted so that we can hear our guest speaker today. If you have any questions for our guest speaker, you may use the chat feature, which is located above your screen. We'll have time for it in the end. Only Blum Center staff and our guest speaker will see your questions. Please do not share any personal medical information or questions in the chat box. If you have a personal medical question, please ask your doctor. Lastly, at the end of today's session, you'll be directed to a brief survey, which we'd like to ask you to help us complete. Your feedback is valuable to us as we plan future programs. Okay, so next I am going to introduce you all to our guest speaker, Matthew Thomas. Matt has been with the MGH Police Security and Outside Services for over 20 years as an officer, supervisor, and investigator. Currently, he is the department's Training, Development, and Communications Specialist, and he is an active member of Mass General's Domestic Violence Working Group, Men Against Abuse, and Gun Violence Prevention Coalition. Matt graduated from the Northeast Regional Police Institute in 1995 and holds a Bachelor of Arts in English Literature from UMass Lowell. He has taught hundreds of classes on managing aggression, active shooter response, behavioral analysis, and workplace safety, along with many other security-related topics. Matt is board certified in security management, holding the designation of Certified Protection Professional. He joins us today to give a talk on Armed Intruder Active Shooter Response. So please join me in welcoming Matt.
Thank you very much, Amy. And I'm going to pop up my presentation. Can we see that? Yep, awesome. Okay, so thank you everybody for spending an hour with me today. We're here to talk about something that we don't really want to talk about, and that's armed intruder. And whether you call it armed intruder, active shooter, armed assailant, terrorist, mass shooter, it doesn't matter, it's all the same. We've expanded the name of our topic to armed intruder to include things that don't just involve firearms, but all different kinds of weapons that can cause mass casualties. So we have to talk about this in terms of history to start, so we all know where we're coming from. And in terms of healthcare, whether you work in healthcare, whether you visit healthcare, the Joint Commission came out with a new definition of workplace violence as of the first of the year, and it's just a tweak on their old one. But excuse me, in terms of what we're talking about here, when we're talking about armed intruder, active shooter incidents, physical aggression, which is part of the definition, is one of the things that we talk about. Physical assaults, definitely, and other behaviors of concern, because what we're talking about involves weapons that can cause mass casualties. So by definition, basically, you can see on your screen what the actual quote-unquote definition is of an armed intruder. But my definition is a little simpler, and it, in terms of perspective and what it is that we're talking about, it's someone or a couple people who are basically trying to cause as much carnage as they possibly can in the shortest amount of time. And that's the thing, because most armed intruder, active shooter incidents end relatively quickly. Their goal is to, again, cause as many casualties as they can, and they don't have a lot of time to do that. They evolve quickly and they end quickly. And essentially what it takes in terms of, ending the assault, ending the incident, it's an armed response typically from law enforcement in order to mitigate harm to victims. So the sooner and the faster and more effectively law enforcement can get into an active scene, the better off everyone is going to be, if there could be a better off at that point. We have to be prepared. And this is, we always ask, when I do training, like, who's in charge of my safety? Who's in charge of your safety? Regardless of where you are. If you're an employee here, if you're a patient here, if you're a visitor, if you're inside, if you're outside, it doesn't matter. At one point in time, if something bad were to happen, we need to take ownership for our own safety in that moment until other people can get to where we are to help us out. And so, until law enforcement neutralizes that threat, we have to take that on ourselves, which is why you're here today, because you want information, you want training, you want some tactics and techniques that you can employ should something as awful as an armed intruder situation occur wherever you might be. So in terms of statistics, just to kind of put this in perspective, and I'm not here to scare you, but what I'm here to do is to try to remove any complacency that there might be. And that's important, because if we ever think that things aren't going to happen, then usually that's when they do happen. It's not 100%, but we want to be on the ball. We want to be aware. We want to be focused, and we want to know what to do in certain situations. So here, the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, they did a study from 2000 to 2019 when it comes to active shooter incidents. What's ironic about this is that there were 333 active shooter incidents between 2000 and 2019, and I believe as of last week there were 333 mass casualty incidents in the United States in 2022 alone. So these are definitely increasing, and that's the point of this, and is to make people aware that they are happening, and they will continue to happen. In Massachusetts, up until 2019, from 2000 to 2019, there was only one active shooter incident, and that was in Wakefield, I believe it was in 2000. And that is, again, we all hope and pray that the number would be zero, but it's not. And that's why we need to be aware, and we need to be focused, and we can't be complacent. When it comes to healthcare facilities, let's bring it a little closer to home. Speaking from the Mass General Hospital perspective, again, whether you're an employee, a patient, a visitor, it doesn't matter. If you are, people always seek healthcare for one reason or another at some point in time. So there have been 15 incidents out of that 333 over the last 20 years between 2000 and 2019. And that number is low compared to other industries. But again, it's not zero. These things do happen. Now, there are specifics that we're going to talk about when it comes to like what happens in hospitals in a minute that'll put this in different perspective. Using the definition that we talked about, again, most amount of carnage, shortest amount of time, multiple victims, possibly multiple firearms or other types of weapons. Mass General Hospital has not had an active shooter incident occur here on our property. We have had incidents that have occurred. I've been here for 23 years, and I've been a response officer, investigator for 2 shootings that took place here. Both were not armed intruder, active shooter incidents. They were one-offs where there were specific targets that were involved. Now, some information, this is, again, when we talk about healthcare hospitals in particular, most of the time when shootings take place, it's targeted and personal. The incidents that occurred here were that. One was a defensive shooting. The other one was a murder-suicide. But those were personal in terms of the responses and what had happened in those instances. They were not mass casualty incidents. And when we talk about healthcare in general, what we see a lot of times when it comes to violence, when it comes to violent incidents involving any type of weapon, it's more targeted towards the person, the victim, or the victims that are involved. The majority had one victim, and that was a specific target. And usually as you investigate, as people investigate, we learn that there was a personal relationship. They were related somehow. It wasn't just a random act that occurred in those institutions. Having said that, you're more likely to be struck by lightning twice than to be involved in an active shooter incident, an armed intruder incident, where we're talking about a mass casualty incident. But again, to try to take away complacency and to make people more aware and be active in terms of their own safety and taking ownership for that, I always ask the rhetorical question, or the rhetorical statement, tell that to the folks that were involved. You know what I mean? And that's unfortunate. So, the possibility is there and will be there. Common myths that we often see, and this usually, you hear this after the fact, after something happens, is this came from out of the blue, like nobody saw it coming. And that's an issue, because most of the time, the majority, if not more of the time, when active shooter, armed intruder incidents are investigated, there were warning signs that did occur, that were present, that people saw. These things usually just don't happen. There's a lot of planning that goes involved. And during that planning, that's when people can pick up on certain behaviors, which we'll talk about, that could indicate that there is a bigger problem at hand, other than just someone who is someone who's upset or has a grievance or something like that. Again, they just snap. That's a myth, because these things don't just happen. They are planned. They are planned ahead of time. Violence is random, spontaneous, and unpredictable. Again, not true. There are warning signs. There were warning signs. And when we talk about specific behaviors in a little bit, you'll see that when you cluster behaviors together, you can paint a bigger picture, and that bigger picture may not look so good. And when we talk about interventions, we want to help people. We want to, help people get better if there are issues or certain things that are going on in their lives that will help keep them safe, keep us safe, keep everybody safe in general. Situations will revolve themselves in time, and that's untrue, because when people are aware of behaviors that exist that might indicate that there is something more at work than just a grievance or someone being upset, if we don't get involved, if we don't intervene, and by intervene, I don't mean, like physically sit someone down and have a conversation. I mean, maybe get law enforcement involved, maybe get another set of eyes and ears on the situation to determine if there's a credible threat that people need to be concerned about. We don't want to be the people that saw something and didn't say something. We want to be the folks that saw something and did say something. For us New Englanders, I'm sure we're familiar with Julian Edelman, who played for the New England Patriots. Somebody had some Twitter information out there that they were going to shoot up a school the following day, and he saw it. He took it upon himself to phone the local police department where that tweet came from, and they intervened, and they found a stockpile of weapons and plans as to what was going to happen the following day. So if Julian Edelman does not make that phone call, what happens the following day? So we want to be the ones that have that information. I don't. I want to be upfront. I want to let people know what's happening, so that there can be some type of positive intervention. When we look at past incidents, again, we're still talking about history and the number of incidents that have occurred over the years. We always have to look at it from a lessons learned perspective after the fact. So in other words, what can we do better? What can we do to stop this from happening in the first place? Or what can we do to respond better should these awful incidents take place? Well, they're planned events. So there were things that happened in the past. Take Columbine, for instance. The two assailants in Columbine were stockpiling weapons and making journal entries and writings and things like that if people had seen and paid attention to and reported on, may have averted that incident. You know what I mean? It's not just that one. This is frequent. Pre-incident signs existed in the majority of incidents. So again, we can't ignore certain things. One type of behavior may not paint a picture at all, but when you cluster a bunch of different behaviors together, negative behaviors, things that may indicate a future violent incident, then we want to pay attention to those, and we want to do exactly what we can to stop that from happening. Incidents occur in a target-rich environment, and this is why we see a lot of shootings in private industry and in schools and educational facilities, because there are a lot of people in those locations. And when it comes to armed intruders, active shooter perpetrators, they're going to look for, again, the most amount of carnage, shortest amount of time. They're going to look for target-rich environments where they can hurt as many people, kill as many people as possible. Their behavior and actions in the moment were unpredictable, meaning that they may have a focus on one person and then it all of a sudden just becomes a mass shooting. Well, the mass shooting was planned, that part of it. And that's the thing. If there was a single one-off target, the other casualties involved are random. You don't know where they're going to go, how they're going to act. They're just going to, again, try to cause as much carnage as they can. In the past, first responders were outgunned. In the past, first responders were not trained to respond appropriately. But these are things that we learned. And, in terms of what our outside law enforcement agencies carry for weapons when it comes to certain things like this, they are better armed, because again, it's going to take an armed law enforcement response in order to stop these types of situations as they occur, unless folks on the inside get to that fight response where they neutralize the shooter themselves. Training, one of the biggest things law enforcement learned from Columbine is that, they had a plan in Littleton, Colorado, and they executed the plan great, but the plan wasn't a good plan based on what needed to happen. So when we look at it and say, we need to go right in as opposed to wait, we need to train that way. So we need to train contact teams to enter a building, how they're going to search a building, how they're going to position themselves, what's safe for them and everybody else, certain things like that. So training has become a lot more comprehensive over the years, since these things have become more and more prevalent. tactical intervention was too late. This is something that, like I just said, when you have a SWAT team, and this is the, in Massachusetts, unless it's a big city or town, you're going to have a regional SWAT team, a regional group of officers that are going to have to get the call, get their car, get their gear, get to the location, gear up, get their orders, and make entry. That takes a long time, and incidents most likely will be over way, way, way before that. So that's why, in terms of lessons learned, we're not going to wait for a tactical response. The first officers that show up on scene, they're going to be the ones that respond immediately into the building. Now, there are going to be one-offs, unfortunately, like Uvalde, where that type of intervention did not occur the way that it should have and it needed to. Those are few and far between, thank goodness. However, they do happen, and that's one that we never want to see happen. So in terms of training and why you're here and why I'm here to talk to you about this and to provide information for you, I kind of equate this to, so I have 3 girls, they're 12, 10, and 7. And they do like soda. And the reason why they like soda is because my wife and I gave it to them. Shame on us. But if you don't know, you don't know. But if you do know, then you do know. So when it comes to certain things that we can do here, when it comes to responses to armed intruder situations, we want to train, we want information, we want someone to tell us what is good and what is not so good when it comes to responses, because clearly, we want to stay safe. We want to stay safe when it comes to any type of violent situation. Untrained people, and this is going to be the same for trained people as well, but the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to be afraid because we've just been thrust into a life-threatening situation that we weren't in. We didn't choose to be in, and we weren't in 5 seconds ago. People who don't train, they tend to panic. They tend to fall in disbelief, like this isn't happening, and deny, like this isn't happening. I don't know what people are talking about. Your brain works in funny, very sophisticated ways, and will convince people that reality is not reality. We don't want to descend into hopelessness, and that's the thing. When we talk about fight, flight, or freeze, if we have to fight, we need to be able to do that. If we need to flight, meaning run, escape, hide, run, escape, we need to be able to do that. But if we freeze, bad things happen because we're not in control. We're not in control of our situation, our immediate situation, our immediate presence at that point. So when it comes to trained people, yes, again, first thing, we're going to be afraid. Again, we're thrust into a life-threatening situation. We may feel anxious, but we're not going to be panicky. We're going to be able to function. When we, if something bad were to happen, I hope that you would say, well, Matt had said this, so let's do that. Or I had worked through this, so we're going to try it. We're going to do that. We revert to our training when all, what breaks loose. And that's important. You know what I mean? Because when we talk about, consciously thinking, and I'm going to give you homework at the end of this, so when we do things consciously, it turns into unconscious response after we form good habits. And that's important because, when something bad might happen, we want to be able to act and not have to think too much, let our brain and our body work together from the training that we've been provided and we've experienced. Again, prepare to act as trained. And that's why now we give you information so you have information so you can work on a response and keep yourself safe. And then commit to action. When it comes to armed intruder situations, all bets are off. We need to do what we have to do to survive. That is the goal, survival. You know what I mean? And it's unfortunate that we're in that position. However, we have 2 choices. We can not respond, and hopefully bad things won't happen, but they may. Or we can respond. We can take action. We can run if we can. We can hide if we can't, and we can fight if we need to. So some other things we have to be prepared with to think about. Mental conditioning is always big, which is why part of your homework is going to be learn your area, learn where you live, learn what your responses might be in specific situations. You are going to be the first responder, and you may not be able to evacuate right away, and you might be there. You might need to be there physically for other people in that space where you may have to treat wounds or help, in terms of barricades or things like that. So, those of you who aren't first responders may turn into first responders by necessity. So we have to understand these things as well. Sometimes bystander intervention is the difference between life and death. When we go to the end, when we talk about fight, that's not us looking to neutralize the act of the armed intruder. That's us protecting ourselves in that moment because it has come to our doorstep. So we may have to intervene. We may have to try to take out the shooter or the assailant, the intruder, regardless, based on the fact that we don't have a choice at that point in time. We also have to understand, from a healthcare perspective, that hospitals are soft targets with target, and they are target-rich environments. Because, aside, pre-pandemic, we had X amount of doors open. Now we're down to 4 here at Mass General Hospital, but that's still 4 doors where we want to be open and welcoming to the public. That's part of our model. That's part of our thing. We are part of our community. Our community is part of us. And a lot of hospitals, most hospitals are like that. We may be private property, but we have public access essentially. So again, we are soft targets. We try to harden the target based on training and, where we post our security officers and information that we provide to our staff to keep an eye out for us, be our eyes and our ears. In terms of preparedness, and we're talking a lot about getting out in front of this, because I think we have to agree that if we can prevent these things from happening, then, and I don't have to worry about run, hide, fight, I'm going to be way better off. I'm fine with that. So, in terms of preparation, if we can get out in front of this and prevent things from happening, the better off we're going to be. So the government had a national summit for multiple casualty shootings, and they identified 5 things, in terms of prevention. Identifying people who pose a threat, okay, based on behaviors, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Notifying the appropriate people, not holding on to the information, but notifying authorities, and if authorities mean Mass General Police and Security, then that's great. If that means Boston Police, that's great. If it means any other police department, state police, letting someone else know what is happening and what your observations are could prevent a really, really bad incident from occurring. Evaluating the threat credibility. This is where law enforcement comes into play. When you hear people say that there is no credible threat, that's based on investigation, that's based on follow-up and interviews and evidence and things like that. But how do you get to that point? Well, you notify the appropriate authorities so that they can get involved and get to that point. If there is a threat, we want to prevent it. So what type of interventions can happen by us, by mental health folks, by outside law enforcement, whatever that might be. But there's got to be some sort of intervention, because you can't just let it sit. You have to be able to get other people, appropriate people involved to try to, de-escalate that situation. And then documenting and getting the word out, letting people know, because, it's just one thing to have it, to keep it under your vest. But what if other people need to know? We're big here at Mass General Hospital about, not spreading the word like, flying the bat signal and posting, that kind of stuff. But we want people in specific places to know that there may be a credible threat so that they can take action to be safe, and we can take better action to keep them safe. Information is key. With information, there's a lot more you can do when you know. There's a lot less you can do when you don't know. So again, in terms of trying to get out in front of this, there's different stages to an armed intruder incident. And this is kind of the 5 that happen before the actual implementation, before something actually happens. People tend to air a grievance. They talk about it. They're very upset about it. They're outwardly upset about it. They're internally extremely upset about it. But other people hear people talking about things that are happening, about the negative ways they feel about certain incidents and situations. When we talk about a violent ideation, this is where people develop manifestos. We've heard that in a lot of incidents when it comes to mass casualty incidents, where there were manifestos that were found. There were online postings that were found after the fact, or if they were found prior to, unfortunately, nothing was done about it. But, these are all different types of like, what I want to do, why I want to do it. I mean, almost specifics, in terms of the Columbine, the Columbine shooters, there were certain people that they wanted to go after, that were written down, that were posted when we talk about writings and things like that. And then it evolves into research and planning. So it's not just me talking about it, or thinking about it or talking about it, posting stuff about it and idealizing it that way. But maybe I'm starting to plan. How am I going to do it? What's that look like? Maybe I'm drawing maps. Maybe I'm getting maps. Different things like that. Like what happens? Like what happens at certain times of day? Where am I going to do this? And when is it more target rich? When are there more people present at that point? And then in terms of preparation, in terms of getting certain things and stockpiling, that's a common word that we hear used a lot, where they've stockpiled weapons and explosives or bomb making materials or things like that, where people go out and buy the guns and buy the ammunition and buy the stuff that they use to make whatever it is within their plans and things like that. That's commitment, and that's a problem, for obvious reasons, because now we've gone beyond the thoughts and the speak, but we've gone to action. When people are getting close to implementing their plan, that mass casualty incident, they start probing and breaching. Like, can I, this is my plan. Can I execute that plan? How effective is that going to be? Yeah, they're going to test security, and not just physical security in terms of people, but physical security in terms of doors that are secured and ways to get into technologically secured areas, with card readers and door locks and things like that. Is my plan feasible? Can I execute my plan the way that I have planned it? And if not, then I need to make adjustments. And then the final step is obviously implementation. When you see different things like grievance, violent ideation, research and planning, pre-attack, probing and breaching, during these 5 stages, we can prevent the incident from occurring if we take action. It's when it's implemented, then at that point, obviously, the incident is occurring. And at that point, prevention is not happening. That's when response and action is where we need to be. So in terms of indicators of potential violence, and again, we talk about certain behaviors that become present over time, that they don't just, happen 5 minutes before someone goes out to the car, gets a gun and comes back in and shoots a lot of different people, or uses the car itself as the weapon. There are certain things that we pay attention to. First is speech. What are people saying? Are they suicidal? Are they expressing suicidal ideation? Do they talk about past incidents of violence, things, that have occurred in the past, and objectifying those and putting those up on a pedestal? And notice we haven't mentioned any names or provided any faces of any armed intruders from the past, because we don't want to dignify that type of behavior. They're unnamed, there's no face. And, that's why I refer to the Columbine shooters as such and not by name, because they don't need that notoriety. That may be what they wanted. But, are people talking about certain things, objectifying certain things that have happened in the past, talking about dangerous weapons and how mesmerized by them they might be? Or, when we talk about, comments about putting things in order, that usually happens prior to a suicide or something like this, where people try to, get all their business affairs, all their affairs, personal and business, in order before they actually commit this type of act of violence. Paranoia. And how do people react to workplace changes? Overreaction. Nobody likes change. Of course not. We're all human beings, and, sometimes it's not too bad, but sometimes it's not too good. But is it an overreaction? Is it just something that perpetuates and gets worse and worse, gets bigger and bigger in that person's eyes? And that's what they talk about, what I mean, in terms of how much they don't like what happened. And where someone, like us, as we call reasonable people, we look at it and say, like, that response is a little over the top. That's a little bit over, that's an overreaction to what's happening. These are things that we want to raise the red flag on in terms of, are we seeing some or all of these different types of behaviors? Feelings in general, depression and withdrawal, unstable emotional responses. Think about it from a like baseline behavior perspective, what we're used to. Behaviors that we see when it comes to armed intruders, perpetrators in the past, are that their behaviors are not, or they're above or below baseline, whichever way you want to classify it. They're different. They're different behaviors. Some stuff that we're not used to. There's really not a good word to put on it, because, talking about normal, it's just behavior that we're not used to, that we did not see shortly before that. Feeling either arrogant, like they can take on the world, or extreme powerlessness, like I can't function. People are taking advantage of me. Does it go back to paranoia, where people are out to get me and I need to respond this way? These are things that do and have occurred in the past. Intense anger and hostility. I mean, think about it. What do people need to feel to commit this level of violence? Whether it's anger and hostility, or being spited or slighted, or whatever it might be. Maybe they're just plain evil. That's the way it might be. But, these are things that, again, we want to cluster together in terms of behaviors, and behaviors that we're not used to. And then specific behaviors, outward behaviors, increased use of alcohol or drugs. Again, people like to have a drink. Okay, fine. But is it excessive all of a sudden? These are things we pick up on. We make notes of them because they are different than what we had seen. Violations of company policy, people that don't care, doesn't matter. It doesn't apply to me. That's a thought process. That's a problem. Increased absenteeism. You may have a perfect employee, a perfect person who always shows up all the time, on time or early. Then all of a sudden things don't work out so well. Things are going sideways, and they're late, or they're not coming in today, or they string some days together. Patients who cancel appointments over and over again. Again, something that maybe we need to take a look at, along with some of these other behaviors that we're talking about. Or exploiting or blaming others, not taking responsibility for actions of our own, but blaming other people for our own actions. Responsibility is a big thing. We should be owning up for our behavior. If we start blaming other people, again, that's one of many different behaviors that we could look at. And we have to understand that this isn't a comprehensive list. You know what I mean? Like, there are going to be other behaviors that take place that you're going to note yourself based on your experience, experience through others, training, education, whatever it might be, your background, where things just aren't right in that moment based on your assessment. And these are things that we have to pay attention to as well. So in terms of what does carrying a weapon look like, these are things that we want to be aware of, because if people come into our institution carrying a weapon, we want to know that. We have a no weapons policy, so we want to make sure that people are calling police and security here on our property to let us know what's happening and not engaging that person. But this picture is obvious. I put that there for a reason. I exaggerate for effect. I want to make sure that people understand that that is the handle of a gun. And that's what it may look like, whether it's on the side, the front, the back of a person, whether it's in a handbag and you can see like physically the butt sticking out or something like that. This is obvious. Some things that may not be so obvious. People who you can't see a weapon, but it's 85 degrees out, they're wearing like a winter coat or a coat at all. It all depends. You know what I mean? Something to raise the red flag. If they're padding their clothing, you ask law enforcement officers who've been armed for their entire careers, when they retire, they're still tapping to make sure that, they're thinking like, this is where my weapons, this is where my gear was, making sure that it's present. And plus, when it's our stuff, and if it's high end, like a firearm for a reason, people want to make sure that that stuff is still in place where they put it. Things like that, body parts, padding their belongings, hands in bags, with unusual bulges in like stuff that you would look at someone and be like, there's something not right there. Like, why does the right side stick out farther than the left? If it's underneath clothing or something like that, why is that person holding on so tight to that article of clothing or that bag, or their hand is clutched inside for what reason, we don't know. Things to be aware of. You know what I mean? Again, this is about awareness and getting out in front of it and preventing things from happening. So if there is a weapon, and the obvious part is when you physically see a weapon, we want to make sure that you call us if you're on our property, or you take steps to get safe if you're not. One of the teaching points that I really try to drive home is that if someone's carrying a weapon and it's in a holster, that's where it's supposed to be. If someone's carrying a knife and it's in a holster or a holder or a sheath, then that's where it's supposed to be. When they're taken out, that's not a good way. That's not a good thing. Things just went sideways because there's two reasons. One, to use it, and two, to put it away. And if you're in a hospital in our setting here, you're not putting it away. So if anybody encounters anybody that's armed and like physically you can see that weapon and it's in someone's hands, then you need to get safe, because it's not a good scene. Okay, something bad is potentially about to happen, and you want to get safe. You want to protect yourself. Certain interventions that we can employ. Number one is talk to subject matter experts. Like if you're here, police and security. If you're not here, if you're outside, local police, state police. Anyone in law enforcement, who can give you a different perspective, maybe help out in terms of, de-escalation in terms of that situation, or just putting it in perspective where, maybe how certain actions are justified or not, and taking the appropriate action. Again, and, other types of interventions. There's a lot of times people just wait and see what happens. We have the information we've sent that to the people that need to know, but now we're going to monitor and see what that situation looks like. Interventions, physical interventions like employee assistance and drug counseling, mental health counseling, these different types of things. Notice this is all like heading towards a help, an assistance perspective, a support perspective. Because if we get information that might help us support the person that might be perpetrating this crime, that's going to de-escalate or prevent it from happening. And that's, for obvious reasons, very, very important. On the other end of the spectrum, things can happen like a physical law enforcement response, where you've got, people going to houses, executing search warrants and trying to quell the situation or stop the situation from occurring with a higher level of force. Legal action, civil or criminal, where arrests are made for threats or, for taking specific actions, whether it's local or it's federal. So you've got two different ends of that spectrum, where it's the support and the intervention, you know, in terms of benign response. And then you have a higher end response when it comes to law enforcement and court action and things like that. And then there's a lot of in between, some of which I mentioned. So let's talk about responses. Let's talk about certain things that we can do. Run, hide, fight is what the Department of Homeland Security has prescribed for many, many years now. And this is what we use. This is the process. This is the menu that we offer to you in terms of things that you can do. Run, get out, we used to call it, evacuate, whatever you want to call it, to run away, to escape, to get safe, to distance yourself from that situation. The farther away you are, the better off you're going to be. For obvious reasons, the closer you are, the more vulnerable you are. But know how to get out from where, you know, from any type of situation, you know, at home, here at work, if you're here as an employee, a patient, a visitor, if you're on our property, what ways can I get in? What ways can I get out? What ways can I escape and run if I need to? Leave stuff behind. Take people with you that are in the immediate vicinity. If you're running down a stairwell, take someone with you if they're on the way. We don't want to go chasing people down because that creates more victims in terms of us and potentially other folks. But as quick as you can, as efficiently as you can, if run is your option, which is the preferred method, should something bad happen. Now, having said that, it needs to be done safely. We're not running into a situation because Matt said to run because it was the best option. Running safely is the best option. And I'm going to show you a little video that goes through exactly what that might look like. Because again, if we don't know, if we haven't seen it, if we haven't practiced it, this will give us this will point us in a better direction. There's no sound. So here's what happened. It's been reported that an active shooter has taken place. Now they're going to evacuate the conference room. Notice they've left everything behind. They know where the exits are. They're going out the fastest way. Now they're going to encounter someone who has no idea what's happening, but they're going to take her with them because that's the safe thing to do. Notice they didn't go down the hall to get her. She's on their way out. So as they go down the emergency exit, they're going to come to the outside. Hands up, fingers spread. This tells law enforcement, I am not a threat to you. And they're also going to follow exactly what actions law enforcement prescribes to them at that point in time. They're at a meeting place, someplace that is far enough away where it is safe. They can make notification to colleagues, to family members, to law enforcement to say, this is what I've seen and this is what I've experienced. But again, from a safe space. At some point during run, hide, fight, we would like you to make a phone call, either to 911 or if it's on our property, to us, but not in the middle of when you're running, when you're hiding, or when you're fighting. It needs to be done safely. So your first priority is you, run, hide, fight, then call. Okay, so please keep that in mind. Your second option, your second menu item is hide. Okay, hide and barricade, shelter in place the best you can in whatever location you are in. You know, you want to basically put as much stuff between them and you as you possibly can. The more resistance they encounter, the better off you're going to be, and the quicker they're going to move on. Because again, go back to the definition that I talked about before, most amount of carnage, shortest amount of time. So in order for me to do that, if I encounter even a locked door, I am not going to waste my time trying to get into that space. I'm going to find an easier target. So we have to harden our target, even if it's very close to us, in an office, a conference room, an exam room, wherever that might be. So we have to harden the target closer to home, closer to us in that case. And as much stuff as you can put in the way, whatever that might be. We can replace items, we can't replace people. So I don't care if you're pulling stuff off the wall, if you're ripping stuff up from the floor, get as much stuff as you can between the assailant, between the intruder and yourself. This is what that looks like. So in this space here, they're going to barricade the door, bring as much stuff again as possible between them and what's happening outside. And it may not just be a single barricade, it might be a double barricade. So now you've got the front door that's being barricaded, but at the same time, they're creating more of a barricade on the inside of the room. So just in case someone comes in, now they are sheltered in this space again. Down low, out of sight, pagers low, phones low, so, you know, or off, you know what I mean? Silenced at minimum. So that way nobody knows that they're there. Out of sight, out of mind, as silent as possible. So again, as much stuff as you can possibly put between you and them. You want to create as big and as best a barricade as you possibly can. Last resort, fight. We're not looking for a fight. We're not looking for an armed intruder. We're not running down the hall, when we hear shots being fired, and we're not running in that direction. Okay. If it comes to us, if we have to barricade or it happens right in front of us and we need to take action, if we barricade and that person comes through the barricade, then we have to be ready to fight. We have to be ready to try to take out the armed intruder, because at that point, it's a choice. It's either them or us. And, we need to decide that it's them, and we need to do anything within our power, use anything within our means when it comes to fashioning weapons out of weapons that are weapons or weapons that aren't weapons, but could be weapons. Fire extinguishers, big, heavy objects that we can wield, those are great. When it comes to liquids, whether it's cold water or hot coffee, it doesn't matter. That's going to act as a distraction. And sometimes we have to use our hands, in order to get in when it comes to something like this. Chairs that move, flagpoles, scissors, anything like that, anything that you can locate in your specific immediate area at that point in time that you can use as a weapon. It's hard to say and it's hard to hear, but when it comes down to it, we need to take action to keep ourselves safe and to survive, because again, that's what this is about. This is about survival. We have to take positive action to stay safe and to be able to walk out when this thing is all said and done. And this is what fight looks like. So we're trying to make a phone call, let people know we're in a conference room, how many people there are, and we see the intruder. So now we need to get low, get safe. And if they're coming through that door, well, we need to make sure we have some stuff that we're going to be able to use that's going to allow us to take positive action to stay safe. Cup of water, cup of coffee, doesn't matter. Hands in the middle, fire extinguisher in the front. They come through the door, all out assault. That's what it's got to be. Get them down, splash, control, get the weapon away, and nobody moves, nobody gets up until law enforcement arrives. We want to make sure that that person is stationary and can hurt no one else. That's the goal. Survival is the goal. One of the things that always comes up is whether or not we, as healthcare workers, are obligated to die for our patients, or anyone for that matter, our colleagues, our patients. We did some research on this, worked with our attorneys, because we needed to get an answer, like a literal answer, for whether or not this is something that needs to occur. The answer is no, we are not obligated. Now, there are two sides to this. There is the legal side, the legalities behind it, meaning that if I am close to a door and a patient and I choose to go out the door as opposed to barricading with the patient, then that is an appropriate response. If I decide to go in the room with the patient, barricade with the patient or my colleague or anyone else, then that is an okay response. Either one is okay. Having said that, how are we going to come to terms with the fact that we did A versus B or B versus A or whatever that might be? That's up to us, which is why, it's a personal decision as to what we do. Okay. We may not have a choice. Running down the hall to our patient, if that's something we were inclined to do or to save someone would create more victims, then we need to run. We need to get safe for ourselves. We also have to understand that regardless of what choices we make, they are personal choices. And there may be a lot of different things behind those personal choices, personal things that we're not privy to, whether we're colleagues or, we're in a patient clinician relationship. There are things that we don't know about that cause people to respond in specific ways, which is why, again, this is a personal choice. How we act is a personal choice. We have to decide if we're going to run, if we're going to hide, and if it comes down to it, how we're going to fight. You will be supported. If you are an employee of Mass General Hospital and you choose to run, you will be supported. If you choose to hide and barricade, you will be supported. If you choose to fight, you will be supported. It's very important, because part of this, getting out in front of it and making sure it doesn't happen, but acting appropriately, being empowered to make the right choices for our safety and potentially the safety of others. Because my choice in a big room could be out the door and down the hall. And my choice could be we're all going together. And my choice could be we're all going to barricade together and fight together. And me, that being a general statement, because we all have our own choices, our own decisions to make. In terms of response, you need to know what you're going to get. So you know what your options are. Run, hide, fight, call at some point. Let people know what's happening, what the assailant, what the intruder looks like, where they are, what they're carrying, these different types of things. But what are you going to get in return? Our response here at Mass General Hospital, in terms of our police and security department, we are an unarmed department. So our job is to let people know what's happening, make the proper notifications, and work with law enforcement, create a safe perimeter so people can evacuate. When they run, we can pull them out. We can keep people from entering a hot zone where there is an active incident occurring, so that there are no more victims, no more casualties that take place. But because we are unarmed, we do not run into that location. We have to work with law enforcement who are armed and can appropriately respond to that incident. And we can provide maps and radios and key cards and physical keys and whatever they need to do their job effectively. We've pre-planned this. We've pre-stacked certain areas with certain information that's going to help just in case something like this were to occur. In terms of law enforcement response, you need to know what you're going to get. This is a contact team in training, what we talked about before. People need to train. This isn't something that you can just roll out of bed, go to work, and just respond to. People need to train appropriately in order to be able to respond to the situation. Their job is to get to where the armed intruder was last known to be, where the gunshots or whatever it might be are coming from. They're not going to treat victims. They're not going to rescue people. Once you evacuated and got to a safe location, make sure you pay attention to what law enforcement has to say and do what they tell you to do, because your cooperation is going to let them get to their job a lot faster and be a lot more effective, especially because we're not part of that threat, but they need to rule us out as that, okay? They're going to go neutralize the assailant. They're going to get into contact teams, usually 4 or 5 armed folks. They're not going to rescue people immediately. And they're not going to treat victims immediately. You cannot do this stuff effectively if you have an armed intruder who's actively committing this mass casualty incident. Once that has stopped, once that intruder has been neutralized and taken care of, then that's when they can go in and rescue and treat victims on scene. After the all clear, rescue begins, medical treatment, like I had said, and then they're going to investigate, because this isn't something you just turn around and walk away from. So if you're involved in terms of being a witness or a potential victim, however you want to classify what you've seen and what you've experienced, they're going to want to talk to people and find out what happened, how it happened, these different types of things. So they're going to want to have a conversation with those folks that were present. Again, when you're interacting with law enforcement, hands up, fingers spread, so they know that you're not a threat. Bad things happen in the hands. The hands are the parts of the body that kill. They fire guns, they stab, they drive, these different types of things. So the law enforcement wants to see your hands. I always say, if you're interacting with law enforcement in a high octane situation like this, in a mass casualty incident, do whatever you're told. Doesn't matter how spited you feel. They are running into a situation to save yours, our lives. And they weren't involved in that 5 minutes ago. They are now. So they need as much cooperation from us as possible, so they know that we're not a threat to them. That helps out with stress and anxiety and things like that in that moment. So please be compliant. Do as you're told, whether you're handcuffed, whether you're put to the ground, whether you're told to go to the ground, whatever it might be. Please help out, be compliant. That way they can rule us out, you out as a potential suspect in that situation, and they can move on to other folks that need to be looked at, okay? When it comes to information, when you're talking to law enforcement, who were they if we know? What do they look like? Where were they? What did they have for weapons? How many of them were there? Is there one or more people, one or more weapons involved? What types those were? All these different types of things are going to help out law enforcement get to that location where they need to be to neutralize the assailant, to neutralize the intruder at that point. In terms of recovery, all right, we're going to need a lot as people, as human beings. We're going to give you everything you need. This slide could be just completely blank, because you're going to get anything you could potentially want to etch on that chalkboard. We will, here at Mass General, should this occur on our property, in our house, we're going to work with administration, outside law enforcement, to get whatever potential resources our folks need, whether they heard about it, whether they were personally involved in it. It does not matter. It's something that we're going to make sure that we provide as many resources as we possibly can. We're going to assist with casualties, with people that are wounded. Now, like I said before, we're all going to turn into first responders, whether we are by profession or not. It's not going to matter. We're going to end up doing things that we may not have thought that we would ever end up doing. Transporting patients, holding this person, on a wound, trying to secure pressure on a wound or something like that. But anything we can do, we're going to do. In terms of after action, we're going to be visible. We're going to be way more visible than we are now. We're going to do way more patrols than we do now. We're going to get people out and about, so that way people understand that something bad may have happened, but it's not a one-off. It's not a single person's issue. It's everybody's issue, and it's something that we're all working together to try to recover and try to be as resilient as we possibly can. We want to return to normal business operations, and this isn't from a monetary standpoint. This is from a getting back to business standpoint, getting back to what used to be a normal course of business, normal routine, shall we say. You know what I mean? Because that's a step in the right direction in terms of trying to get better, trying to be as resilient as we possibly can. We're going to make referrals for our employees to the Employee Assistance Program. They're great counselors, they're great people, and they're going to be on board. Again, what do we need? This is what we need. That's what we're going to get, because this is one of those things where it's not going to go away very quickly, and people are going to feel this probably forever. So in order to get the right mental health intervention, if possible or necessary, or even just a one-on-one conversation with someone who's good at listening, whatever that might be, we want to provide as many resources as possible. We have no problem. They have no problem in terms of employee assistance. And I've worked with a number of folks over there, going to whatever location they need to go to have, like either individual one-on-one, or even for an entire work group, an entire department, an entire unit, an entire hospital, because of something that may have occurred. So their resources are going to be endless. Our resources are going to be endless. For those of you who are employees, know that employee assistance is available 24 hours a day. Numbers on the screen there. If you take a quick second, if you want to jot those down, or know that you can go to their website. That's a Mass General Brigham level department, but they service everyone within the system. Okay, so just understand, employee assistance, employee assistance is going to be available 24 hours a day, as are we here at Mass General in terms of police security and outside services. Like I said, we're going to be out and about, more visible. We're going to be a great resource for you as well. And we can hook you up with employee assistance if necessary. I hope none of this happens, none of this comes to fruition where we actually have to implement these things. But if we do, then just understand you're going to get whatever you need. All right, let's talk about homework. My parents are retired teachers, and homework's homework. Homework is what it is. It's good to have it because it keeps you sharp. So memorize our information, no matter where you are. Okay. Know your resources. If you're an employee here, know how to get a hold of us, regardless of what site you work at. They may be different numbers. If you're outside of Mass General, you're not an employee, but you're a patient, know how to get a hold of us here, but also your local law enforcement. If you pre-program 911 into your cell phones, or specific business line information for your local police, that's a good way to go to, just in case something were to happen. Note too that if you dial 911 from a cell phone, it's going to go to the Framingham State Police Barracks first. Then they're going to say, where is your emergency? Then they will transfer you to the right police department. So understand there's a little bit of a lag there. Wherever you might be, locate your evacuation routes and how to exit, how to run. Where do you go? If you have a specific office, where are your closest exits? If you frequent a certain place outside of here, how do you get out? Or if you don't, take a look around. Be aware of your surroundings and see, if I need to run, if I need to go, something bad happens, where am I going to go? How am I going to do that? That's really, really important. Same thing with your hiding places, wherever you might be. And this is universal, no matter where you are. You can look at a place and say, this is where I can hide. This is where I can barricade. If you have a private office, please do that, because that will get you in the habit of A, figuring out how to get away. And then B, if I can't get away, how am I going to barricade? How am I going to hide? What am I going to use that I have at my disposal? Same thing with weapons. We have a no weapons policy here at Mass General, but you have things in your workspaces, in your workplaces, in your personal lives, in your personal places that you can use as a weapon should something bad happen. And again, we're talking about survival. So we may need to use certain things in order to be able to survive that situation. So, in terms of walking away, how do I run? How do I hide? How do I fight? What can I use for resources? What can I use at my disposal in my locations, no matter where they are, where I can execute one of these three things to stay safe. And sometimes it may be fluid where you hide, but then all of a sudden you have the opportunity to evacuate for whatever reason. You have an opportunity to run, then that's great. Or if you're running and then something happens where you need to hide, you need to be able to change options. Okay, so know what your options are. Practice through mental conditioning. Just because you're not physically practicing it doesn't mean that you can't get your brain and your body to work together just by closing your eyes, picturing a situation, and working through that mentally. Okay, plus it makes you stronger mentally, being able to execute better physically. Same thing with the physical practice. If you can practice with action, through action, that's what you want to do. If you can physically walk out of your office or your space and escape, evacuate that location, you're going to do that much better the next time because you've identified where and how, and you know what that looks like for you. Same thing in terms of barricading. If this were a live class where I had, 29 people in a room, we would physically practice this stuff because that's what helps best. But we're not. So we need to be able to picture it, condition ourselves mentally to be strong and to be able to power through these bad situations. And then through practice and through action, when I have a moment, I can physically walk to an exit and out. And that is what I have for you. Tough topic to talk about, tough to think about. It's necessary, unfortunately. I was telling a class I taught earlier this morning that I just don't like doing armed intruder classes because I wish they weren't. It wasn't something that we had to talk about. Back when I was growing up, we used to do fire drills and evacuation drills for fire drills. Now my girls are growing up and they're doing lockdown drills because of armed intruders and active shooters and things like that. So it's unfortunate that we're at that point.
Thank you so much, Matt. This was all very helpful tips. We are now at the end of the session, so if you have any questions for Matt, feel free to enter them in the chat. Do you have any tips on how to start, formulate a plan with families?
Basically, as long as you know what your options are, and that's why we went, run, hide, fight is short and sweet. It is what it is. Run, hide, fight, right? So it's easy for a reason. And you could, if you're talking about families and that type of stuff, I have team meetings. I have Team Thomas meetings at my house, and it usually doesn't have to do with this, but, with other things that need to be discussed and certain things, plans that need to be made for whatever it might be. So I'm a big fan of team meetings. You know what I mean? Like get your family together and say, look, if this were to happen, these are our options. And what does that look like? Kind of like what I'm doing here. You just turn into that facilitator where if we were going to run, how do we do it? If we're going to hide, how do we do it? If we're going to fight, how are we going to do it? And that's important, just to understand those options, and then getting people thinking outside the box too, because sometimes you have to improvise and you have to adapt to that situation. So it's not a bad idea to think about, where's my front door? Where's my back door? If I'm in an office, where's the stairwell lead? Does that take me out to the back of the building? Does it take me out to the front of the building? Where would I be safer? There are a lot of different options that you have. I mean, there are 3 options that you have in terms of menu items, but there are a lot of different things you can kind of point underneath those. So.
Thank you. So this would be a question from either an employee standpoint or patient, family, visitor of the hospital. Okay. If we are on the MGH campus, is the best number to call during emergency 911?
It is whatever number you can think of. In that moment, your brain's going to be going in a lot of different directions. If the only number you think of is 911, absolutely call 911. If the only number you think of is, 62121 from a house phone or 7262121 from a cell phone, then great. Whatever number you can call, whatever number your brain tells your fingers to dial, then that's the way to go. 911 is a great thing. It's short and sweet. Our number, it's only 2 digits longer from an in-house phone. But at the same time, you may not remember, even though the number could be right there in front of you. You know what I mean? This is such a high octane type situation. If you think 911, absolutely make it happen. Whatever way you can get help.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. We have a question regarding lockdown drills in schools. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on why are children in schools taught to hide?
I have a couple different opinions on that. I would hope that, they would be taught to hide, because run is not it's not an option. But I know that schools use different programs like Alice instead of run, hide, fight. So I tell my girls, because I teach one thing and they learn something similar, but a little bit different. I say you look to your people in authority, your teachers, your principals, anybody else, any adults, any trusted adults that are in that space, and what they tell you to do, that's what you do. I can't pretend and think that, a run, hide, fight response would be better than what certain, specific school districts are teaching, because they vetted that information for themselves. I can tell you from a personal perspective, I like options for my girls. I like the run, hide, fight option, as opposed to the lockdown and shelter in place. I think that, my personal opinion is that, if you have more options, then you can move in the right direction. If you only have one option and that option's taken away, then you end up with really big problems. But the thing when it comes to schools, and one thing I've learned, is that when school incidents have occurred, they've executed the plan appropriately. It just wasn't such a great plan, my opinion, my personal opinion.
Thank you. We are about that time, but we have time for maybe one quick question, if that's okay with you. Okay.
Absolutely.
Do you have any thoughts on evacuating equaling more potential targets? Any statistics on this?
No statistics that I am aware of. However, there was a study that was done a while ago, and I can't give you a citation on it, I apologize. But what was learned is that even with trained marksmen, think about it from a military perspective, from a law enforcement perspective, like, Navy SEALs, Delta operators, SWAT team members, crack shots, however you want to classify it, they would hit a moving target less than 80% of the time. So that's why we say, look, a potentially best response would be to run if safe. We don't want to run into a situation. We want to run away from a situation. But if you're moving, it's harder to hit you as a target. That's the first thing. The second thing is why, we want to do things safely, in a safe way. So in terms of evacuation, we don't want to evacuate across the street in view. We want to evacuate as far away as we possibly can to where it's safe. If running out the front of the building, one of the things, a good thing to think about is that where law enforcement is coming from is a safe exit, because they've just come from there. So we always tell people, if you're going to run and you can exit where law enforcement is entering, then you're in a safer space. But you do want to get far enough away. With armed intruders, again, most amount of carnage, shortest amount of time, unless their plan was to shoot from a high rise, like in Las Vegas, or other places, then if they're inside, they're going to stay inside. If their focus was outside, then they're going to continue outside, which is why my suggestion is always run, and exit again where law enforcement's coming in. Harder to get you. And like, if they did, like, part of that same study was, or, another study was that, 90% of the time, if you are hit, you're going to survive if you're moving, if you're not stationary or stagnant in that location.
Thank you so much, Matt. This was all very helpful.
Great. My pleasure. Anything I can do.
And everyone else, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Hopefully you found today's session helpful. As I had mentioned, today's session is being recorded. So if you're interested in viewing the recording, you can visit the Blum Center website at massgeneral.org/Blum-Center. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.